Hi Margaret, and everybody else who's watching this video. Thank you for your question regarding why do orchid roots rot in semihydro, and it got me thinking, and believe it or not, I came up with like 10 reasons as to why this happens. So it's going to be a bit of a clip by clip video because I'm going to try and show you some examples as to what I'm talking about, and maybe that can be of help. So this is Masai Red. I just thought I'd do the intro and stare at some pretty bright blooms. Thank you, Margaret, very much for giving me the brain scratch and forcing me to verbalize this, and as well as clarifying things for myself, which I hope I'm actually doing and not just talking about. We shall see. So let's have a look at why do roots rot in semihydro. So let's see about the first and foremost, and I believe the most important point of why do roots rot in Leca or semihydro, not just Leca, in semihydro as a setup. For me, it's because they can't breathe. That's one of the major factors. Whether you have a new root, an established root, it doesn't matter. If there's no oxygen exchange, it's going to fail. So it is important to keep that airflow going by pouring water through on a regular basis. And the reason that frags are quite successful in this method is because we know that frags like fresh water. So by default, we pour fresh water through on a regular basis, and they're successful. If here we have a new plant being put into semihydro, regardless of Leca, lava rock, or ceramus, regardless as well of us putting in everything with spraying it with hydrogen peroxide, there are spores, there are microbes, and those will perpetuate in the media if we don't keep flushing and removing them by pouring water through. So renewed energy, renewed oxygen, and removing old debris, be it microbes, fungi, spores, etc., helps with regards to regenerating the oxygen within the pot, allowing the roots to breathe. Another factor why roots rot in semihydro is if they're snapped from the get-go. So if a root is snapped, then it already has an opening point of damage when it gets into a semihydro setup. It is quite important to avoid those compromised roots, because those microbes can get in there and perpetuate the damage even further and faster. Okay, so even if we flush, etc., a snapped root, unless it's absolutely necessary for anchoring purposes, that there's nothing on the plant and it needs to get established, a snapped root needs to be cut back to the point of the snap or cut back entirely. Because we don't want opening points inside a semihydro setup where the humidity and the nice watery environment is a breeding ground for these guys. Okay, so there's that, compromised roots. Some of them are microscopic that we don't even see, so we think we have a great root in front of us and we leave it on. It can happen, and it's not a big deal. It's just something to know, to be aware of. These things need to be flushed out and need to have constant oxygen access. Another point is, if the root is already compromised, let me explain it a little bit further. For example, here you see Roy Tokunaga, and these roots, I don't know about the other Tokunagas out there, but Roy Tokunaga, the roots are like glass, and yet they feel firm. So if you're trying to repot this into Semihydro, as an example, some root systems are so fragile, they will be compromised no matter what. And then basically, I'm not saying you're in trouble, but then it's either, it doesn't matter if you put it in bark, or in sphagnum moss, or in lava rock. A compromised root is going to cause damage within the pot. It's going to cause nasties, and there's nothing you can do about it. So that's not a Semihydro problem, but it's always seems to be associated with a Semihydro problem. Okay? The root system itself can be a big factor in how successful an orchid will be inside Semihydro from Jump Street before new roots grow. This one, I repotted it despite the fact that I pretty much broke every single root. It was planted in sphagnum moss. You wouldn't believe it. It was planted in sphagnum moss. It came to me, and I picked out the sphagnum moss all very carefully, and I just heard it snapping as if I was eating the cereal, snap, crackle, and pop. It was that bad. I remember I was watching the Ryder Cup at the time I was doing it, and I just was like, I can't believe I'm going to lose this plant. However, the vigor of the plant itself makes a big difference. And then it just took off, and it was root bound within 3 months. So that was, Ryder Cups in September. It goes to show that it's not necessarily a seasonal thing. It can be a plant vigor thing as well. So I had only rubbish roots in there, and still it took off. And I'm sure all the old ones are rotted. But I haven't replanted it yet because there was no need at the time. And for this coming season, I'm not going to either. But the next time, at least I know that it's a vigorous plant and it will be okay. So, a bad root system, a delicate root system, a compromised root system are all factors for rotting roots in Semihydro. It's the vigor of the plant that will determine if it's going to take or not. So for me, the fourth reason why roots will rot in Semihydro is a high mineral buildup in the media. And that has nothing to do with a year later. That means immediately. Leca specifically has a high mineral content straight out of the bag. You can boil it, you can flush it, you can do everything in preparation and then pot it up. You think you've done it, and no, you have not. There is no way to get rid of that high mineral buildup unless you soak the leca for 6 months. And that is a ridiculous time because you want to get onto potting. So what you're seeing here on my Rene Marquz crossed with digbyana is my repotting of leca that didn't even soak for a week. Even though I was flushing, even though I was trying to keep the oxygen exchange going, this is what happened. So why haven't I done anything about it? Because A, I thought if the plant lives, great, but I'm not going to disturb it because then I know it will go downhill. So in this case, I left it, I kept flushing, and now even you see the root right here. I'm sure it's compromised. Of course it's not growing anymore. It's wrapped around a high salted mineral built up piece of leca there. But the plant is pot bound. See, I can lift it up. And that makes me think, okay, I'm not bothered about that one root. When I see that the plant itself is starting to establish and starting to grow, I'm not bothered. So whatever is in there is functioning, is working. I'm not going to start fiddling around with this Leca at this point in time. It doesn't look nice, but that's about it. The plant stalled and didn't bloom for me, but now it is. So the roots in there are fine. It's something to really take in consideration when transplanting or putting something into Semihydro. How clean is the Leca? And of course we don't all have 6 months to wait for Leca to be completely saturated, changing the water every once in a while to refresh with new water to leach out more, etc, etc. My recent Leca has been over winter in RO water for 6 months, and I'm not expecting this problem at all. But bear in mind that if that is the case and the Leca hasn't been flushed properly, the roots will rot inside, the plant will stall. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because it can't take the mineral buildup. Okay, so in this case, I think for me, another reason, the fifth reason why roots would rot in Semihydro. We're going to look at some pretty blooms while I talk about this. This is Rene Marquz with Potinara Free Spirit. And another reason I would say that roots will rot in Semihydro is because the media has the wrong pH from the jump street. If your media itself is way too high in the pH or way too low, then you need to know, and you need to adjust anything you're putting in there accordingly. My current Leca, when I've soaked it for 24 hours after doing all the boiling and prep, it has a pH of 8.59. Yeah. So I can't reduce the pH fast enough in order to do some potting up, unless, of course, as previously mentioned, I leave the Leca in RO water for 6 months and switch out that RO water regularly. But prior to sourcing this Leca, which is Zero from Portugal, I had the brand Hydro Rocks. And I'm telling you, that stuff came out at 4.5 pH. So yeah, no wonder roots were rotting, failing, and the plant wasn't doing well. And it had the smell when I was flushing it, when I was cleaning it and boiling it. There was such a high metallic odor in my kitchen. It was incredible. It made my eyes water. So you can counteract it if you have a media that has that kind of a pH discrepancy by, upping your pH when you water, or, as in my case, lowering the pH when I water or fill the reservoir. So what goes into my reservoir, even with long soaked Leca, is always 5.8. And I do that because at 5.8 is where the nutrients start. We know that the absorption of all the nutrients basically starts at 5.8. And then as it goes and up through the pot, as the wicking process takes place, it will go to 6.3, 6.4, and then it will absorb all the nutrients. And that is my theory. So far, I haven't seen any deficiency in my plants that I've had over 2 years. I've had deficiencies when I got them, but based on throwing a water and fertilizer mix into my reservoir at 5.8, nothing shows any deficiency to my understanding. So it doesn't matter what kind of pH your media has naturally. What matters is, what do you put in to counteract the media in order for the roots to be able to take up nutrients and not to rot. I hope that makes some sense. Catyclia Atrowalker is our next subject of interest as an example, because I do believe that roots will rot in a pot when you have a weak plant to start with. And this clearly is not a happy plant. Could I fiddle with it? Could I do something else with it? Yeah, I could. but I'm not going to, because for me less is more. I just keep on pouring water through. I've put a little layer of sphagnum moss on top so that hopefully it will somewhat absorb some humidity or encourage some roots. But if I change it, it would have to go through the whole process again. So I got a weak plant. I put it into the Semihydro self-watering setup. For me, they're both the same. It's just two different things, but it's semantics. So I put it into the setup here with the Leca. The roots have rotted. As we can see, the plant is not happy, but it's going to stay there because there's enough going on that I don't need to go into rescue mode. I think that after that, the plant will actually fail entirely. So there's enough energy, I'm just going to leave it, but a weak plant will trigger root rot no matter what you do. It'll trigger root rot if you put it into bark. If it's weak, any kind of transplanting will rot the roots and you'll have to start again, and it's a major setback, but it has nothing to do with Semihydro. But of course, a weak plant for Semihydro will cause root rot. So my sixth reason or probable cause is the desiccation of roots even prior to them making it to the Leca. And that could be a lack of humidity and also the top dry layer. So you can see here on my Masai Red that I have a lot of roots that have just stopped growing right there. All right, so this one, I base it down to the dryness of the Leca on the top layer, not inside the pot. And these guys, I base it down to lack of humidity because obviously they haven't even gotten to the Leca yet and they dried up. So lack of humidity around the root base and the desiccation there drying up on the Leca. Okay, that is not exactly root rot, but it would be on a weak plant a fail. Of course, you don't want the roots to grow, you want them to do well. So that would be something to watch out for. Misting is important, but in this case, because the Masai Red is so well established in the pot, honestly, I'm not bothered about these roots. So I'm going to slowly pan you over, excuse me, leaf, to my Laelia Zip. If you remember from the Rapiculus Laelias video, there's a root there that I pointed out that was sort of, I'm leaving it to see if it will dry out or if my misting works without using the microfiber, which you can see tucked back. Another leaf. Je m'excuse. You can see the microfiber tucked back in the back there. Now, if this was a root I was really needing because I didn't have many, I would be more worried and I would put microfiber on it. But as this plant is now root bound in its pot, I'm okay with watching it and seeing what it does. However, let's move across here and look again at the Cattleya velutina, which I showed in my bebes video. So you see, I put a Leca bead there that is a bit, you can see the residue, the mineral residue. Now, if I were to leave that there, those minerals will desiccate the roots as well. So of course we don't want that. You can see the green root over here. It's all green and nice because it's been sprayed this morning with RO water. So I put this Leca bead as an example of what could possibly cause a root that is starting in Leca to fail. So you want to either mist it constantly or get rid of that Leca. And candidate for my 8th reason as to why roots would rot in Semihydro. This is Brassocattleya Jairak Kiku. just look at the blooms while I kind of say the obvious, which is, every orchid is different. And we have to consider what is the orchid going to do in 6 months or in 12 months. And there's fine roots, there's chubby roots, there's the time of year, is it in growth mode, is it not, how much water does it need? All those factors will be relevant in the knowledge of whether the roots are rotting in the pot or not. So considering the fact that every orchid is different is a big factor in my point of view regarding putting something into semihydro and when. Semihydro is an excellent method for every epiphyte. The only thing is, it is a bit more work in establishing an orchid than one would like to believe. It does require constant maintenance. You constantly have to be on top of things until the orchid is established. After that, it becomes an easier grow method. But it's not, contrary to what I see a lot or have heard about a lot, it's not like, woohoo, I have a reservoir, I don't need to worry about it. Yes, you do. In the beginning, in the early month, 6 weeks, maybe even 2 months, it has to be a constant thing to take care that the orchid can adjust accordingly and not just set it in semihydro, think it's going to be okay because it's a high humidity environment. It's not. It needs maintenance. And then you get candidates like these. If you remember with the Oncidium deep dive, I mentioned Peggy Ruth Carpenter. Well, here it is again. It's just one of those classic examples I can easily refer to. Some orchids will just take their time and struggle regardless of what you repot them into. And there's nothing you can really do about it because that's just the way they are. They're finicky. There are some that just won't react even if you take it from bark to bark. Peggy Ruth Carpenter in my collection is a classic example of that. I put it into semihydro straight away because I thought, you know what, you're gonna either accept this or you're gonna go downhill. And it was maybe a bit radical it sounds nasty, but if you want to commit to a growing media, then pretty much you won't know whether it's successful or not until you see how the orchid reacts and if it will respond. And if you remember that I mentioned that this pseudobulb down here literally became an inverted C. It was that wrinkled and desiccated, and it has corrected itself. I'm not putting that down to luck. It's because I left the orchid alone, let it figure itself out, because moving it one more time into some other media because maybe I got it wrong, that's not going to do the orchid any favors either, and the chances of it collapsing and dying completely are higher than just leaving it be, pouring water through it, making sure that the top is a little bit more humid until you can see that the roots are in there solid. And they are. Basically, you will see what happens to the pseudobulbs as it responds. And I don't need to, go on about that. We all know that. But it's not the right time after 3 months to think, oh my God, this is going downhill. And trust me, I have it all the time. I'm doing something wrong. Like when I showed you the Atrowalker, oh, this has been too long. And it's been over a year. That Atrowalker has done nothing for over a year. I'm just going to be persistent because if I move it, if I change it, I'm risking its demise. Of that I'm sure. But sometimes it's the kind of orchid that you get, the roots will rot anyway. But that would mean that's not the fault of semihydro. That is with any bark, any other media, lava rock, you name it. It's just the way the orchid would be. And the only way to find that out is to do it and see what happens. how about this candidate for my last consideration as to why roots rot in Semihydro? Isn't that beautiful? So what I think, and this is my prime candidate, is also wrong timing when repotting into Leca lava rock Semihydro setup. And I'm picking out this one as the candidate because this is pressure for me. If you know a little bit about me, you know that I struggle with Phalaenopsis and Leca Semihydro. And this beauty, yeah, it makes my heart beat a little bit faster for when the time comes. Because my daughter saw this. This was our last outing to the garden center to stock up on pet supplies. And I had the blinkers on. I didn't want to look at the orchids. I just needed what I wanted to get and get out of there, because I know I'll start buying something and then you know how it is. Yeah, well, Mom. And I'm like, oh no. And then this. And I said, oh yeah, get her. She is so pretty. So I've thought long and hard, not really, but you know, there's one name I wanted to come up with because I don't have a name tag on this one. And I thought, you know, it's a crown, it's pretty, it's like a crown jewel. And then I thought Corona. And then I thought maybe that's a bit insensitive. It's probably not the right thing to do. But I found a better name. And I'm calling her Bubbalicious. Because I call my daughter Bubba. And I already have one that's called Bubba. But this one surpasses it. So this one is called Bubbalicious. And that brings me to that point about timing the transplant. And I know all about timing, and I know when it's supposed to be an active growth and the roots grow. And I've done it over and over again. Root tips growing, this, that, and the other, and I have lost so many fowls. But I did have to bring this point up. I needed to, because it is a fundamental factor. Regardless of my mistakes, regardless of what I'm doing wrong, timing is everything. And then add all the other things that I mentioned before regarding, you know, flushing out this, doing that, bringing oxygen into the pot, not mineral heavy leca or media. But timing is of key importance. And I hope that I get it right. I know it for a fact, and I want to get it right. I don't want to lose this one. It means a lot. Again. So there's a factor as well that has come into play, which is called heat maps. Yes, 2 years in a row I've been growing and trying heat mats, and still I lost a lot of fowls despite heat mats. So I gave up on those because it was like throwing money out the window, losing the plants plus the electricity cost. But yeah, heat mats didn't work for me either. So I cannot stress how important timing is, and then stick to your guns with semihydros. Leave the orchid to get accustomed to its new home. That's more note to self than note to you or anybody watching this, because I'm really nervous about transplanting this one. I would be gutted to lose it. Isn't it pretty? Yeah, I love it. So in conclusion, I hope that this actually made some sense. And there's something I really, it's important to me. Please don't think I'm patronizing or presumptuous. I'm not. I really am not. Sometimes when I get into a flow, and it's more like I'm talking to myself, you know, with the frustrations about what I've experienced, and then my voice or you know, how I speak, it changes a bit. It's not meant to be patronizing whatsoever. So I really hope that it didn't come across that way. Sometimes, you know, it's like like I mentioned, that's how I am when I talk to myself, and I get frustrated with myself if I've made a mistake. And it's nothing personal, and I do apologize if I came across too harsh, too lectury, too much of a German. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope it was something that you can work with, useful to you, and please keep your fingers crossed for this one. I really don't want to hurt it. I do not. Okay? Thank you so much for the question, and for watching, and for taking the time to sit through this video. I really appreciate it, and I hope I see you again next time. Bye.